Hello and welcome to this introduction tutorial to AWS ECR. So the ECR is the Elastic Container Registry service from AWS, and it offers us a registry where we can store our Docker images. So those are going to be Docker images that we built from our application or some other Docker images. So we're going to create a little bit, we're going to make a little bit of a demo here. So we're going to kind of demonstrate how we can use the ECR. And to begin with that is what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here in the search bar and I'm going to search for ECR. And as you can see, this is the service that we're interested in. So it's the Elastic Container Registry. And you're going to get presented with this view where you can actually kind of see some details about this service. But what we're going to do is we're going to click Create Repository. So this is in order to create a repository within the registry. I'm going to go ahead and click Create. And this is how the registry is going to begin here, like with the settings of the repository. Basically, this is going to be the repository name. So as you can see, it kind of starts with the AWS account number, and then we have to specify a namespace. I'm just going to specify my apps, for example, and I'm going to say that this repository is going to be, let's say, demo app. This is another config option here, so image tag mutability. So this is if we want the images to be overwritten. In this case, I'm going to keep it like that. So I'm going to keep it mutable, so the tags, so they can be overwritten. And this is the encryption. I'm just going to keep the default one there. And I'm going to click Create. Now, after I click Create, as you can see, right away, we have our repository created. And we can straight away use it. So this is a Docker repository where we can push Docker images. But how do we push Docker images? So in this tutorial, I'm going to demonstrate how can we push a local image. So right here I have WSL here and I have Docker. And if I go Docker images, I have a couple of testing images, specifically this demo app image. So this is just a Spring Boot application. This is just a Dockerized Spring Boot application. And it has a tag, so basically it's 1.0.0 in this case, the version. And what's going to be the goal of this demo is to push this image to the AWS ECR, so to the repository that we just created. Before we begin with that, one important thing is going to be is to install the AWS CLI, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and search for that. And as you can see, if I click right over here, installing or updating to the latest version of the AWS CLI. So what does this mean? What's this? Basically, this means that in order to interact with the AWS services, you would have to install the AWS CLI. And there's a couple of ways, obviously, to do this. That depends on your operating system. So if you're using Linux, if you're using macOS, or if you're using Windows, depending on your operating system, you're going to have to go through the steps for your operating system. In this case, I've installed it using the Linux instructions. That's because I'm using WSL on Windows. So I used the Linux instructions right over here, and I installed it using this script right over here. But depending on your operating system, you're gonna want to go through the through the appropriate one for you. Now, after you've installed the AWS CLI, you're ready to use the AWS services within your terminal. But before we can actually go ahead and access the ECR, we're going to need to create an access token. And the way that we do that is through the IAM. So I'm going to go to IAM right now. And right over here, this is the Identity and Access Management. Basically, this is where we can specify or add, in this case, a user. And we're going to need a user that's going to be able to access the ECR. So I'm going to go ahead and create a user right now. And this user is going to be ECR user, for example, something like that. I'm going to click next. And now policies, I'm going to go ahead and attach a policy to this user where the user can access ECR. Now that kind of policy is something that we're gonna have to create. So I'm gonna click on create policy, and right over here is where I'm gonna specify some permissions for that user. So this is gonna be a user that we're gonna use in the CLI to access ECR. So I'm gonna choose the Elastic Container Registry right over there, and I'm just gonna allow everything. Now this is not really ideal. You kind of want to restrict it, but for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm just gonna allow everything, and I'm just gonna allow all resources, and I'm gonna click next. This is just for demonstration purposes, so we're allowing everything, and the policy name is gonna be ECR all access, so something like that. And I'm gonna click create policy right over there. And right now we should have a policy created. So if I go to customer managed here, we have the ECR all access. Now we're gonna go back to the creation of the user, and it's still not there because I have to refresh it. So I'm gonna leave the page. I'm gonna refresh it. So we kind of lost the details there. So I'm gonna go ECR user, and again next, and then we're gonna go to the attach policies directly. So to attach policies to this user, and I'm gonna search for the customer managed, and there it is, ECR all access, next, and that's it, create user. And just like that, we have a user that kind of has all access to ECR. Now we've installed the AWS CLI. If we go to the command line and if we do AWS, we should be able to use the AWS CLI. Now let's take this local Docker image right over here, and let's try to push it to the ECR that we just created. So to the Elastic, to this one right here. That's going to be the goal, because that's going to be one of the use cases, obviously. Now, in reality, you would be pushing to this ECR, I don't know, where your pipelines, where your CI/CD pipelines and those kind of things. But in this case, we're going to go and we're going to push from our local machine. So now what I have here, I have a notepad with a couple of commands that we're going to execute in order to achieve this. The first one is going to be AWS configure. This is basically to log in to authenticate our AWS CLI to the user that we just created. So I'm going to go in the terminal and I'm going to do AWS configure. Now, as you can see here, we have to add the AWS access key ID. And how do we get that? So we go to the console, we go to the user that we just created. So this is going to be this ECR user that we gave permissions in order to have access to all of ECR in this case. And we're going to go to create access key. And right now here, the use case is going to be the command line interface. And I'm just going to click, yes, I understand the above recommendation. So yeah, this is another way to do that, but we're not going to tackle that way in this video. So we're going to just keep it simple and create the access tokens right over here. But there is another way to obviously authenticate into the CLI. But for now, we're going to keep it simple and we're going to go with the access token like this. So I'm going to click next, and I'm just going to say ECR, I don't know, ECR key. And I'm going to click create access key. And technically, what we're going to get here is we're going to get the access key and the secret key. I'm going to copy the access key. I'm going to go in the terminal, and in the AWS configure, I'm going to paste it right over there. Then I'm going to take the secret key. I'm going to paste it right over here. And the default region name, yeah, that can stay if you don't have something selected. So these are from before. These are from something that I was configuring before. But if you're doing it for the first time, these are going to be empty. But in this case, it kind of did remember the EU Central one. That's my default region. So I'm just going to keep that. And the default output format, I'm really not going to add anything. And just like that, we are authenticated to use the AWS CLI, and we can check that by doing AWS ECR describe repositories. So if I spell that correctly, we should get, and yes, as you can see, we're getting back the repositories, a list of repositories, and we're getting the repository name here, my apps demo app. So the one that we just created, we're getting it right over here listed out. So that means that the authentication works. Our CLI is connected basically to the AWS, and it has the permissions in this case to list the ECR repositories. Now let's go ahead and try to push, so the local Docker image, let's try to push it up on this repository right over here. So if we go to the repository right here, so if I go repositories, as you can see, it's empty. There's 0 images. So what are the steps? The first step is actually to log in Docker to our container registry, and this is the command that we're gonna need to do in order to do that. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna go ahead and copy this, and we're gonna have to change a couple of things, but before we actually copy it, I'm gonna change those things. So the first thing is gonna be the AWS account ID right over here, and that's where we want to add our AWS account number, and that number is actually conveniently right over here, this one. I mean, you can find it on a bunch of other places, but it's also conveniently right over here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy it, and I'm just going to add the AWS account number right over there. And this is going to be the AWS region here placeholder, so I'm just going to do EU Central 1. So this command basically is going to go and get the login password, and then it's going to use obviously that password to authenticate Docker with our ECR. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take it like this, and I'm going to run it. I'm going to click enter, and as you can see, yeah, I do have a mistake. So we also need to change this AWS region right over here to EU Central 1. So let me take that. I'm going to copy it again. I'm going to go back right over there, and I'm going to click enter. And now we should get, as you can see, login succeeded. So now we're logged in. Now let's go here and let's take a look at the next command. So this is the tag, Docker tag command, and this basically is going to take our local image with the tag, and it's going to retag it to the ECR repository. So basically, that's what we're going to do. Now I'm going to, right away before copying, I'm going to change the things here. So the local image, so that's going to be our local image right over here, and that the name of that local image is this demo app right over there. So I'm going to go ahead and just like that, demo app, and the tag is 1.0.0. So I'm going to copy the tag. I'm going to add the tag, the AWS account ID, that's basically this number right over here, the same one, and the AWS region is the EU Central 1. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that and just paste it right over there. And now this here, so this is going to be the repository and name and your tag. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, sorry, I did not mean to do that. So I'm going to go to, let's go to our repository. So I'm going to go to, let me just go back to ECR, Elastic Container Registry. And this right over here is basically what we want. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy it, and I'm just going to actually paste the whole thing, basically just like that. So this is going to be the repository name, and then we can also add the same tag, in this case 1.0.0. So this command is going to retag our image with the repository here. So I'm going to go ahead and run that, and now if I go Docker images, as you can see, we have the image here retagged with our ECR. And now all that's left is to go ahead and push that image. So I'm going to go and write Docker push, and basically we are pushing this image that we currently retagged locally. So I'm just going to change that, copy that, and I'm just going to enter it right over here, click enter. And this, just like that, it's actually going to start to push the image to the ECR, and this might take a while, so this might take a couple of minutes depending on your internet speed and all of that, but all in all, when this finishes, what's going to happen is when we go right over here into the ECR, we're gonna be able to see the image. Now we're gonna wait a little bit for this to finish. Now this is not gonna be that fast, but I mean this really depends on your internet. But it will take a while, obviously. And when this finishes, I mean it depends on the internet again. It might not take a while if you have fast internet, but yeah. But as you can see, it's halfway there, and the image is gonna land right over here, and we're gonna be able to use that image. I mean, there's many ways of how you can use the Elastic Container Registry. As I'm saying, it could be the place, I mean, it probably will be the place where you will be building, for example, you're gonna have a container registry like this, and you're gonna have some sort of pipeline that builds the application, builds a Docker image, tags it with a version, and pushes it to ECR. And then from ECR, you pull it into your deployment, and you obviously update the deployment, taking the latest tag or doing stuff like that. So there's a bunch of uses for this, obviously, but that's just one use where you're using it for your application release. In this case, as you can see, it's kind of finished actually. So the command finished, it says that it pushed. And if I go right over here, so if I go in the repositories and if I refresh, as you can see, what do we have there is the one image. So we got one image. There's the tag 100, and if I click it, as you can see, this is basically the image URI, and it's exactly what we had there. So my apps demo app tagged at 1.0.0. And just like that, we've successfully taken our local Docker image, and we pushed it to the ECR, to the AWS ECR. So that's kind of going to be all from this demo. That's going to be all from this video. I hope you learned something new, and see you until the next one.